All right. I guess everyone's still kind of returning in from lunch. That's always a very important, time to mingle back in after a delicious meal. So I totally understand. But
I have to say, by the way, thank you for having me as the first person after lunch as opposed to the last person before lunch. much better spot.
yeah, much better spot. You feel the happy audience, full audience.
As opposed to the last obstacle before lunch.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much, Olivier, for joining us. I'd love to hear a little bit, just to start us off while everyone kind of comes in. I'd love just your quick background of when you founded Datadog and a little bit about your kind of relationship to building a public tech company in New York.
So I actually moved to New York in the late 90s, in 1999. I came for an internship out of all things, thought I would stay for 6 months, and I'm still here 25 years later. I started New York in 2010, and we can come back to that if you want, but it was actually not easy to get an infrastructure tech company founded in New York back in the days. Mm-hmm. But we successfully scaled it. I think today New York is a very different place from an ecosystem perspective. And now we're, 15 years later, we're a publicly traded company. We have about 6,000 employees throughout the world, out of which about 1,600 are based in New York.
Where do you see the New York tech ecosystem kind of having, strengths at this moment right now, especially perhaps around, data and AI, and then where are some areas that are still, we're looking to grow more?
So it's interesting because New York was always strong in research. So what brought me into the US initially was an internship at IBM Research, which is upstate New York. Was extremely well regarded at the time. I think still is, though I think a lot of the teams there have been pilfered by Google Research and Meta Research and some of the other groups. And so there was always a good amount of people working on research in the New York area. What was lacking initially was folks who understood how to build tech fast at scale, because most of the companies that had done that were based on the West Coast. So when we started, that was one of the reasons it was hard to get funded, is that none of the companies that were building what we're building were in New York, and none of the people who were building that, for the most part, were in New York either. It's changed quite a bit. So now you have us. There is MongoDB as another large, publicly traded company, started in New York and scaled in New York. And most of the hyperscalers, so the Metas and the Googles, have extremely large offices in New York that attract all sorts of people. Some of them start in the Bay Area, move to New York afterwards. So you have a lot more mixing of the different functions. But I would say it was always strong on research and AI in particular.
Yeah, I was going to say, how does New York market in particular now in this moment where everyone is desperately trying to hire machine learning engineers and deep learning professionals as much as possible, having a strong research community here would certainly be a benefit, but how do you see it as a market for AI talent, especially as so many people do flock to the Bay Area? Just in my personal life, engineers I know have all moved to San Francisco, so obviously still a lot of pull there, but how do you see that?
There's definitely a pull. So San Francisco, from a research perspective, in the frontier AI, I think a lot of it's happening in San Francisco. Quite a bit also is happening in Europe. There's a number of labs in
Paris too.
And in the UK. And there's also still some happening in New York. I would say in general, so it's interesting because back in the days when I started a company, it was difficult to find people to scale and build products and all of that stuff in New York, but you had the research. I would say today it's changed quite a bit. I think it's actually probably easier to understand how to build the right product in New York than it is in the Bay Area.
How come?
I think the reason for that is that New York is more of a normal city with normal companies, as opposed to in the Bay Area, everybody is in tech, is at the forefront, is hanging out in these kinds of parties, and when you hear something that you agree with, it might very well be something that you said yourself 3 days ago, and it just found its way back to you through four different people. I will say we actually created the fact that we were more in touch with the real world, as one of the reasons of our success. When we started the company, we had many different competitors, all Bay Area based, all way better funded than we were, and all with founders that had better pedigrees. They had started similar companies before, they had worked for hyperscalers. McGovern and I didn't have that. But what we had was we're so shit scared of getting it wrong that we spent all our time talking to all of the companies that would listen to us. And I think we did a better job initially at finding the right problem and having our customers keep us honest, as opposed to being a little bit too blinded by everything else that was going on around us in the ecosystem. I will say also from talking to a number of AI founders and AI researchers, to speak in AI terms, there's actually a gradient that goes from the West Coast in the US to Europe. And the closer you get to the West Coast, the more people are completely bought into everything is going to happen with AI. So if you go to certain places, San Francisco, we barely have two years to find a hobby before the machines do everything for us. And then if you go all the way back to Europe and maybe France in particular, where people maybe are culturally a little bit more cynical, I would say, you hear things such as, yeah, LLMs maybe they'll revolutionize poetry, but I think for everything else I wouldn't bet on it. And I think, of course, the truth is somewhere in the middle, but you do definitely see different approach or different levels of different levels of critical look at the technology and more focus on the applications.
So New York could be the kind of midpoint between that, Paris European perspective and the SF perspective, and
yes.
Geographically as well too. When you're flying across, why not make a stop here?
Yes. So we're basically tech forward like the West Coast, but also not nice like the French.
It's the perfect combination. Well, I was going to ask also, what are your when you mentioned your customers, I'm curious what they have been asking for from you in terms of AI products and what they're looking at. How are they approaching adopting AI themselves, and how does that relate to your business?
Yeah. So it's really a tale of two cities between our customers. So we have a relatively smaller number of customers that are AI native, and largely today these are the folks that are building the infrastructure. So companies that build components to manage GPUs, folks that are building the financial models, be they in LLMs or image models, video models, sound models, or companies that are selling the vector databases, like things like that, like the infrastructure folks. They know exactly what they're doing. They're at the forefront, they're building. Their focus is on scaling and making sure that they can serve their customers. On the other side of the spectrum, we have the vast majority of our customers across small business, mid-market, enterprise that are still figuring out how to adopt AI. So they're mostly still, so every single one of our customers is experimenting, playing with it, but very, very few are in production, and even fewer are in production with some scale. And I think the biggest challenge for them right now is to figure out how they get to productionize everything, and how they understand how to use the new technology, how they understand how to deploy safely their AI models, how to understand what the right form factors are for their AI applications. I mean, I think we all got a pretty good idea of what a chat application looks like. It probably is not going to be the way all applications work in the end. I think we got a pretty good idea of that by now. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to happen there. So really focus is getting on production. And one of my worries is that it might actually take a little bit longer than we thought it might.
Just because of kind of the lag from enterprises, or
experiments,
or what do you think? Yeah.
Well, just the lag from humans. I think customers have to understand what they're going to use and how they're going to use it. Understanding customer feedback and iterating to build the right products takes some time. Even from the moment you've decided to build something, it also takes some time. To make things even tougher, like the tech stack at the bottom of it, like whether that's the databases or even the models, all that's changing very fast, which makes it a little bit unsettling for the companies that are building on top of that. I think the analogy I would give is it took many years after the iPhone came out for all of the applications we're using today to emerge. And that's not because we needed the phone to be dramatically different. Actually, it behaved the same way. That's because it took some time to zero in on the right form factors, the right applications, and have people behavior change to incorporate that in their life every single day. I think it was pretty shocking to see how fast ChatGPT picked up usage. But it looks like a lot of the use cases it picked up initially were use cases that were great for chat to start with, where people had a prompt. So the homework is basically a prompt. So yeah, sure. I mean, I put my homework into it, and it's going to do it for me. I think many of the other use cases across the industry are not prompt. And so now we need to figure out how to build applications for that.
I'm going to say, within Datadog, what applications are you experimenting with, or if you can share, publicly? Yeah.
I mean, well, the first things we built, like everybody else, is a chatbot. So people have a prompt, et cetera, et cetera. The thing we found, though, is that people are not quite sure what to ask when the problem they have to solve is not itself a prompt. Like, it's actually pretty disarming. And in my career, I've seen multiple iterations of chatbots emerging as a brand new thing and then disappointing everyone and then disappearing. So the second version of that, something that we actually announced this week at our conference, was an autonomous agent, something that instead of waiting for you to ask questions, is going to jump in, and say, okay,
an AI agent for your
incident
customer?
resolution, yeah, okay. For incident resolution. So basically, the idea is you get paged in the middle of the night, you're having an issue with your application. One of the first things you do is you hop on a chat room with your team to try and fix it, and then an agent joins the chat room and says, while you were coming online, I run a few experiments. This is the list of the things I've looked at. I think you should look in this direction. It's probably the database. By the way, the database team hasn't been paged. You want to page it now? Yes, no. Also, there is customer impact. You should declare an incident and update the status page. You can do that here. Yes, no, et cetera, et cetera. So this is the first version of it. And the idea is that over time it gets better and it starts solving things on its own without you having to do anything. But really, the most important part of it is us experimenting with the form factor, figuring out how we actually get the people to interact with it, and what's the most natural way for users to start using it, but also to start building trust with it. That's always been the toughest to do with AI products.
Yeah, where are you in that process? I know you announced it recently, so rolling out more.
Yeah, we're rolling out now. So
Yeah,
now we're
absolutely.
using it internally. We're using it with a few design partners, and now we're going to see how it behaves.
How it behaves in the big world out there.
Yeah, I mean, right
exciting.
now it's been tested in simulation, right? So we assemble like a whole collection of past incidents, and we've trained the agent on that, and it seems to be doing well. Also, as we keep adding functionality to our product, like the agent's doing better and better, so that's good. But now we need to see how it behaves in the real world. And it's also very, very important and very hard right now, to not oversell on AI.
You said oversell?
Oversell, yeah. Our industry has been guilty of that for the past, since the beginning, really. Like, when we started the company, every year there would be a new company that says, we're going to solve it with AI, which at the time, by the way, was not really AI. At the time, it was, AI better known as multiplications, additions, and subtractions. I think now you have a case to make. Yeah, actually, you can actually call it AI. But there's been generation after generation of products that promise AI and under-deliver, and so we have to be careful with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of shifting more kind of high-level discussion, just given your experience being an early player in database, cloud, infrastructure. How do you see this moment kind of shifting products? Because a lot of the work that you've been doing has also been like a consumption-based model, and that seems to be, for a business model for retaining customers, is you use these products and you pay for your usage rather than having software as a service kind of model. And it seems like in AI, many are pitching AI as sort of a switch to more consumption-based model over time, but you've done this for a while, so I guess what do you see in terms of that continuing in the AI age? Is that kind of a technological and business shift combining over time? How do you look at this?
Well, there are two reasons to pick a consumption model. One is because it's the best way to get at the value. Like, at the end of the day, your price needs to align with customer value. And the second reason is that there is a strong infrastructure cost component to what you do. So that's the reason when you buy from a cloud provider, you pay on consumption. That's because you buy storage, you buy compute, and it's a relatively, I would say, still good margin, but relatively low margin product, and you need to make sure that you charge based on what's consumed there. I would say in AI right now, AI is expensive, so there is definitely an aspect of protecting against cost. I would say it might be the case long term, it might not. I think some of the functionality we implement today might be a lot cheaper to implement, in 2, 3, 4 years. So it's possible that it becomes about the same as operating normal software in terms of the cost of AI. The bigger question to me is, what do you need for the business model of AI to make sense? Software, if you don't sell it consumption-based, it's usually sold seat-based. And seat-based, when your product is might actually inherently be replacing seats, is a bit trickier to solve, to sell, or at least the way you sell for value might not be the same. So we'll see what happens. But I think right now there's a big question on business model.
Yeah. Well, also, you've come up in the early days when you founded Datadog, and it was kind of the middle of the cloud wars, right? Where everyone just assumed, oh, AWS is going to be the victor of all of this, and there's a lot of parallels now with discussions around OpenAI being just like at the foundation model level, like the victor of all of this. But as we've seen since this conference across the stage, that's not really the case anymore. That's not taken for granted at the same way. And so how do you see this moment in AI compared to like when you were coming up in those earlier days of cloud? And are there these parallels with foundation models that you're seeing now? How is it different also? Yeah,
so I mean, look, it's true when we started, and I would say maybe like 7, 8 years ago, at some point, it looked like maybe in the end everybody's working for Amazon. So it was a little bit worrying because for what we do, it was good to have a diverse ecosystem. Like if everything is just one culture, one stack, like there's less value to be added. I think that's clearly not the case. Like right now, we have a very, very healthy race between 3 players, and we have many other players after that. When I think about the AI models, I wouldn't compare them directly to the cloud vendors. I would, because there's a few more parameters. There's whose vendor is dominant, but also what's the kind of delivery that is dominant. Is it going to be something that you run yourself? Is it going to be open source? Is it going to be something that you buy behind an API? Is it going to be something that somebody else operates for you? And I would compare it more to the database market, where today we have a healthy mix of, on the one end, you have the open source databases that you run yourself. Then you have the open source databases that are run by somebody else for you. Then you have the proprietary databases that you run yourself. Then the proprietary databases that somebody else runs for you. Then the proprietary databases that are just behind an API and you don't even know they're databases, but you access them this way. And the market is actually pretty healthily split between all of that. Because there's good use cases, good reasons for all of those to exist, and people are going to make their choices. And any given company is actually going to use a mix of those. Like companies, like when you look at our customers, companies run their own MySQL or Postgres internally. Companies pay for MongoDB behind an API, even though they could run it themselves. And they also use maybe DynamoDB or BigQuery or some of the other services from the cloud providers that are just purely API gated and they can't run themselves. So we see a mix of everything. And my best guess as to what the LLM market ends up looking like is that.
That makes sense. We're about out of time, so I just have one more question for you. But just for Datadog and your focus, where do you see kind of AI development within your product stack, but then more broadly within your system, complementing and growing in the next 6 to 12 months? And then I'd say beyond that, like if you could predict the future, if you had a crystal ball, how will this impact your business?
I mean, look, we see business impact already today. Like we disclose in our earnings that I mentioned earlier, the small cohort of AI native customers, they already represent between 3 and 4% of our revenue, and that's growing very fast.
AI native customers?
Yes. So that's real, that's already happening today. In terms of the impact on us, I would say there are 3 things that are interesting to us. One is the fact that there's this whole new stack that the world is building on, and we need to build tooling for that. So that's super exciting. The second one is we can do a lot more automation for our customers. So that's us building AI into our products. So we're going to the agent we released. And then the third one, which is interesting, is that it's becoming more clear of late that once you've trained your models on the internet, and they kind of all end up in the same ballpark in terms of performance, more differentiation comes from better data and more specialized data. And as a company that aggregates and processes data for our customers, we actually have plenty of that. And we started actually training models based on that data. And it's very exciting to see that, yes, it's true. Like the having better and more specialized data actually yields better results. So we expect to publish a time series model in the next couple of weeks. It was extremely exciting is that even though it's our first attempt at it, And yes, there are a few technical innovations there, but really what makes it different and better is better data.
Yeah.
So I think it's exciting because when you think of where AI is going to go in the next few years, you have thousands of companies that have very good, very specialized data, and all that data is going to be put to good use. And that, I think, is something we can look forward to.
Yeah, well, looking forward to that as well. Ollie, thank you so much.
All right, thank you.